Yeah, an alignment. And let me ask you, I wasn't aware that you're a close friend of Nigel Farage, who's the leader of the Reform Party and a member of Parliament. There has been talk of the Conservative Party doing a deal with the Reform Party to make Nigel Farage the leader of the Conservative Party and the next UK Prime Minister. Do you think there's any chance of that happening? And do you think Farage will be up for that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's hard for me to speculate, and I'm close with both Reform and the Tories. I think ultimately that would be a good idea. It might be a little early for that, and because they have 4 years, actually 4.5 years until the next election. So I think there's plenty of time to work on that. There are people working on sidelines like Ben Habib who are very tied into both parties, and I think could do a good job, uniting the right-leaning parties here. If not, they'll have an election where there's a natural alliance in terms of two parties forming a coalition. Obviously, Reform and the Tories, have a lot in common. So I think there's less. There are probably fewer differences than there are similarities in the parties right now. And again, I think the Conservative Party is moving to the right for sure. I encourage that, and Reform has actually done a good job of leading that move or that movement. You're seeing it in France. We've already seen it in Italy. Obviously, we're seeing it in Germany. So I think there's a real movement to the right in Europe in general, and in the UK, in spite of having a Labour government, probably for the next 4.5 years. I think there's a real opportunity as these parties coalesce around common sense, the common sense revolution, the sort of the end of DEI, the end of climate alarmism. I think there's a lot of movement amongst the voters. Which party ends up being in control is probably, I think many of us are indifferent to that.
Well, let's go on to the Prime Minister Keir Starmer
Yeah.
himself, leader of the Labour Party, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He's been very cautious in tiptoeing his way through trying to handle Donald Trump. He was in Europe,
Yeah.
in the EU a few days ago, and was asked about Donald Trump. He said, "I'm not going to answer questions about Trump." You can't get more cautious than that. What
Yeah.
do you make of the way that he's trying to navigate these difficult relationships like the one with Trump?
Yeah, like I think he's got a challenge. It's hard, it's difficult. He's trying to work both sides. He's trying to work with the EU and work with the US. I think that's, obviously challenging. But I think what he should keep in mind is when he's with the diplomatic types in the EU, when he's with the leadership in the EU, that's a very left-leaning, sort of metropolitan elite crowd. And of course, he's got to tiptoe around. But what he should keep in mind is that the voters in those countries, in much of the EU, are moving to the right, and it's very delicate. Where he's got to, obviously have some loyalty to his party, the Labour Party here in the UK, and the Labour government, but the trend is not his friend right now, and I think he's got to be careful about that, and sort of pay attention. I would call it read the room, because the voters do not want the things that he's advocating. The voters want the borders closed, and again, much of the same in Europe, and you're seeing that. But also, they don't really. The obsession with climate is waning for sure, and so I think he's better off reading the room. But I don't. I understand that it's a difficult task right now, working with the leadership in the EU as well as the leadership in the US. They're on different pages. It's going to be a delicate balance for him.